The 6th year of secretly liking Brandon, and we were still just friends. When I got sick and had to be hospitalized, he put in more effort than anyone, both financially and emotionally. When my cousin got engaged, he came with me to the ceremony. He gave the most expensive wedding gift of the night. Everyone thought we would eventually end up together. Finally, I mustered up the courage to confess to him. But the man just glanced at me casually. Then, playing with the lighter in his hand, he let out a soft laugh. "I consider you a friend, and you want to date me? Aurora, don't joke around. Be good." I stayed silent for a long time before nodding. "Okay." After that day, we didn't contact each other for a long time. The next time I got a call from him, it was 2 months later. He casually asked, "What have you been up to? Haven't seen you in a while." I glanced at the man across from me, who appeared aloof and indifferent, and answered truthfully, "Oh, I've been going on blind dates." The moment I finished speaking, I heard the sound of a phone being smashed on the other end. I never imagined I would end up here with Brandon. He leaned against the railing, his brows slightly raised, his expression lazy, and a small smirk tugged at the corners of his lips, as though he had heard a joke. He asked me, "So, what is it about me that you like?" My palms were sweaty. You're nice to me. Nicer than anyone else." In these 6 years, he had never missed a single thing in my life. When it was my birthday, he handled everything, baked the cake himself, booked the biggest venue, and surrounded me with people. Lazily lighting the candles, he said, "Come on, make a wish. Whatever others can't do, I'll do it for you." He had a villa with a huge garden full of roses, all because I liked them. He didn't actually live there. He bought the place when I first graduated, overwhelmed with work, being a newcomer, constantly feeling defeated and exhausted. One day, I shed a tear in front of him. Not long after, he moved in and even left me a room. He sighed and said, "If you ever feel wronged, come here. I'm so close to you, who else would you turn to?" When I was too busy to eat, this young heir learned to cook and brought me food every day to my office. His first dish was my favorite. He was born into a wealthy family, yet never acted arrogantly. The number of people chasing after him could circle around B-City twice. When someone found out about me, they asked me to arrange a dinner with him. I was young at the time and didn't know how to refuse. I helped that girl arrange dinner with Brandon, and later that night, I got a call from her. "He seems gentle, but inside, he's really indifferent. I guess I don't have a chance." She told me Brandon was the most well-mannered man she had ever met. After he found out he had been deceived, he didn't get angry. Instead, he patiently finished the meal with her and then said, "Aurora's career is just getting started, and she has to divide her time between two things. If you're not concerned about her, I am. So, if you don't have anything important, don't bother her. Don't you agree?" At that time, everything seemed perfect, like the best of times. Everyone thought that, given how close we were, we would eventually get together. I thought so too. But I never imagined, what if he didn't like me? What would I do then? Brandon raised an eyebrow, and after a long pause, he finally looked down, calling my name seriously. "Aurora. You're 25 now. How many people have you even met? Eventually, there will be someone who treats you better than I do." I froze, already knowing his answer. I choked up a little. It felt like I had messed everything up. It wasn't like I hadn't seen him turn down others before. Girls with beautiful faces, crying in front of him, throwing their dignity aside, saying how much they liked him. But he wouldn't even flinch. He would instinctively pull away, cold and distant. I always thought that he was different with me. But now I realize, he wasn't. I was just overthinking it. Seeing that I was about to cry, he lifted his hand, as if to wipe my tears like before. But halfway through, he seemed to remember something and lowered his hand, picking up his lighter instead, pressing it irritably. I felt a bit desperate. "But for all these years, besides me, you haven't had any other girls around you. Can't we at least try? I really like you, Brandon." I was rambling. But his face grew colder. Suddenly, I felt embarrassed. After all these years, I knew better than anyone what that expression on his face meant. He was losing patience with me. The next moment, he laughed softly, somewhat disinterested, almost like he was closing the matter for good. I consider you a friend, and you want to date me? Do you think that's appropriate? Aurora, stop joking around, and listen. I stayed silent for a long time. I knew, between him and me, this was the end. We wouldn't even be friends anymore. But I asked myself, will I ever meet someone like him again? Someone who will treat me better, who will care about everything in my life. I covered my face and cried out loud. He sighed and lowered his gaze to me. He didn't say anything, but it felt like he had said everything. He waited for me to finish crying before helping me up. He bent his fingers to lift me, then quickly withdrew his hand, slipping it into his pocket. He nodded toward the 2 large bags in the living room. These are the gifts I brought back from my business trip. You should take them with you. I looked over. They were all luxury items, both domestic and international brands. Any one of them was worth several years of my salary. He had given me things like this many times before. No matter how expensive, to him, it was nothing. He always had an endless list of excuses to buy me things, a promotion, a salary increase, or just because I wore a nice dress on a sunny day. If I didn't accept them, he'd be upset. Over time, I got used to his temper and would return the favor: handmade scarves, carefully chosen ties, cufflinks. When he received them, he always smiled. A friend once told me, the way you two are, it's just like dating. If he didn't like you, no one would believe it. But she was wrong, and I was wrong too. Brandon only considered me a friend. I said, I don't want them. He nodded and didn't say much. Before leaving, I glanced back at him. He was sitting quietly on the couch, his expression unclear, holding a cigarette between his fingers. He seemed somewhat melancholic. I thought about the past and suddenly stopped in my tracks. I wanted to try again, maybe slowly pursue him, show him that I was sincere. What if it worked? But before I could say anything, he spoke first. Do you still have the key to the villa on you? Give it back. I had held on to that key for many years. I had never used it. I had never lived there. But I was always afraid he would forget it or something might happen to him at home. So, no matter where I went, I always kept it on me. Only today did it finally serve a purpose. I don't even know how I managed to pull that key out of my bag and place it in front of him. All I know is that I must have lost my composure in front of him. Because when he took the key, he looked at me, frozen for a moment, and then spoke in a near-cold tone, disappointment clear in his voice. I always thought you were different from the other girls. I stood there, awkward and speechless for a moment. I couldn't argue with him. I had told him with confidence that I liked him, but I had forgotten that, up until then, we were just friends. And his family background was prominent, with countless girls around him since childhood, all approaching him under the guise of friendship. After a while, he grew tired of it. He had once said publicly that he would never date a friend. That was why I was the only opposite-sex friend he had. When I found this out, we weren't close enough yet to even think about romantic feelings, so I just laughed it off casually. But now, looking back, it was clear that from the very beginning, he had drawn a clear line between us. He had put his sincere heart out there, treating me as a friend, thinking that I saw him the same way. We admired each other, but it was all platonic. But now, he suddenly realized that it wasn't the case. I was the timid one, the secret admirer, and today, I had finally revealed my true feelings. After returning, I took a 2-day leave and went to the neighboring city for a little getaway. During this time, Brandon didn't contact me again. In the past, we used to talk at least a few times a day. It didn't take long for me to adjust my mood and get back to work. One of my colleagues asked about Brandon, what happened to that super handsome, rich guy? He hasn't come to bring you lunch lately. Before, he had been so public about his actions that everyone knew he was nice to me, perhaps even a bit overindulgent. I said, he's busy. He won't be coming anymore. Just after I said that, one of my colleagues came back upstairs with takeout, sat next to me, and teased. Didn't you say he wasn't coming? I just saw him downstairs. Wasn't he looking for you? For some reason, a feeling of hope surged in my chest. I took out my phone. But there were no messages from him. My colleague pulled me to the window and pointed at a figure below. See, I couldn't have mistaken that. It's him, right? Go downstairs quickly. I clenched my fists. But then, I saw a girl walking up to him from the front. I recognized her. She was Kathy, the girl who had been chasing Brandon the hardest. Kathy came from a well-off family and had a temper to match. Somehow, she found out that I had gotten close to Brandon and threatened to make things difficult for me. I was furious at the time and had a fight with her. When Brandon arrived, he was angrier than I had ever seen him, his face dark with fury, telling Kathy to leave. Then, he carefully bandaged my wound and clicked his tongue. "I didn't know you were so tough. Don't worry, she won't bother you again." In that moment, I really thought that maybe, just maybe, he liked me too. If I just broke through that barrier, I could stay by his side without any reservations. Kathy said something to Brandon, and as he listened, his expression slowly softened. Then, he gave a small smile. At that moment, I regretted having such sharp eyesight. Not long after, Brandon went to open the car door. I don't know if it was just my imagination, but he seemed to glance in my direction for a brief second. But it was only a moment, and his gaze quickly shifted. Kathy got in the car. The car drove away. My colleague laughed awkwardly. "Maybe I was wrong." I said, "No, it was definitely him. But he wasn't here for me." Soon enough, everyone at the office knew that Brandon and I had cut ties. Someone quietly asked me, "Did he break up with you?" I shook my head and took a sip of coffee. "No, we were never together." The person was surprised and opened their mouth in disbelief. "I thought you'd said before that you weren't together, but that was just to avoid making it public." No, from the very beginning, we had never been together. No one believed it. The young heir from a prominent family speaking gently to a girl, looking after her every need, all just because they were friends. But maybe even he had forgotten that he didn't treat any of his other friends this way. She thought for a moment. "You don't know, do you? When you first joined, he actually came to the company and had a long conversation with our president in his office." I froze. I really didn't know. He had never mentioned it to me. But now that I thought about it, there were signs. At that time, a manager who had always been targeting me was demoted not long after, and transferred to another department. And there were so many projects that should have gone to others, but somehow ended up on my plate. I worked even harder. I avoided any situation where I might run into Brandon. And I really never saw him again. I didn't hear his name again until half a month later. I was out shopping with a friend when we walked past a young man. The man was Louis, one of Brandon's friends. He was with a girl I didn't recognize, probably his new girlfriend. When he saw me, Louis smiled and walked over. "Aurora?" I nodded and greeted him. He smiled. "I just came back from a trip abroad. It's been a while. Let's have dinner tonight. I'll invite Brandon too." I said, "No, thank you." Before I could finish my sentence, he was already dialing a number. "Brandon, let's have dinner together tonight." He accidentally put the call on speaker, and I heard a detached voice on the other end, devoid of any emotion. "Send me the address." "Sure. By the way, Aurora's right here with me. I've already told her. You can bring her along tonight." There was a long silence before Brandon spoke again, his voice a little hoarse, tinged with fatigue. "I have a meeting tonight. You guys go ahead." He hung up before Louis had a chance to respond. Louis stared at his phone, unsure what to do. After a long while, he awkwardly turned to me. "Since Brandon can't make it, maybe we'll have dinner another time?" He wasn't a fool. It was obvious from that phone call that Brandon didn't want to come because of me. The meeting was just an excuse. I nodded and agreed. But deep down, I knew there wouldn't be a next time. After Louis left, my friend sighed. She knew all about my feelings, and it was she who had encouraged me to confess in the first place. "He's avoiding you now? Just because you like him?" I nodded. My friend sighed, a little confused. "He's not giving you any chance at all. Not only does he not like you, but he's been so kind to you. Isn't that pure madness?" I didn't know how to respond. That night, lying in bed, I thought about it for a long time. And then I remembered how Brandon and I met. It was a memory from so long ago, and not exactly a pleasant one. Brandon came from a good family and was incredibly good-looking, so he was surrounded by admiration the moment he entered school. He was the epitome of a golden boy. At that time, I was ordinary, invisible in the crowd. The only one who had truly been with him, who had had his affection, was my roommate Enid. Unlike me, she pursued her love boldly and passionately. From the very beginning, her intentions were clear. She directly told Brandon that she liked him. Either he would reject her and they'd pretend they never met, or they would get together, no half measures. She didn't want to hear things like, "You're great, but let's just be friends." She wouldn't accept it. Looking back now, those words may have touched Brandon. The restaurant where she confessed to him was the one I recommended. After they got together, Brandon treated us to a meal. That was the first time I met him. At that time, he was already someone else's boyfriend. I watched from the sidelines, indifferent. Later, they broke up, and Enid left for a while, acting on impulse. Brandon waited for her downstairs in the dorm for a long time, but never saw her. Instead, he ran into me. Once I finished explaining, he immediately got in his car, intending to head to the airport. I noticed something was off with him, so I wasn't comfortable with just letting it go. I took a taxi and followed him. His car sped so fast. By the time I caught up, he had crashed, unconscious. I followed the ambulance to the hospital, staying there until he finished his surgery. I tried calling Enid. Her phone was off. Later, I realized she must have changed her number. That night, I was the only one by his side. The next morning, I contacted his friends and family through the school. I never went back to the hospital after that. Eventually, he woke up and heard people mentioning me around him. Again, downstairs at the dorm, he stood tall, asking someone to bring him upstairs to find me. I thought it was urgent, so I rushed downstairs, but when he saw me, he suddenly smiled and said, "It's you." At that moment, I felt an indescribable emotion rise in my chest. Before that, we had met a few times, but he had never associated my face with my name. I nodded and said, "Enid." His smile faltered. "Forget it." He meant, he was done with Enid. I froze for a moment, but didn't ask further. From then on, he started coming to find me more often, treating me like one of his own. I went from being indifferent to moved. Finally, I fell for him. Liking someone like him was really easy. He'd only been in one serious relationship, and it had been a painful one. Later, Enid came back a few times, trying to get back with him, but he ignored her. It was as though the impulsive person who had rushed to the airport was no longer the same. Last month, I heard that Enid had gotten married, and he sent his well wishes with grace. At that point, I was certain he had let go. More than one person told me, "With how much he cares about you and how there hasn't been any other girl around him all these years, I bet you two will end up together." After hearing that so many times, I really started to believe it. Having a crush is like standing on the edge, unwilling to take the final step. If you take a step forward, it either works out as hoped or it all falls apart. I wasn't lucky, it was the latter. After I cut ties with Brandon, Kathy was probably the happiest. We had a fight. She didn't like me, and I didn't like her. Being women, we could easily see through each other's little schemes. Not long after, I received a package. The sender was Kathy. But the return address was Brandon's villa. I opened it, and inside were the items he had given me that I had refused that day. I thought for a moment and decided to put them away. I felt a little sad. Brandon had clearly disliked Kathy as much as I did before. How had he ended up like this, getting closer to her instead of me? Not long after, my cousin called me. She didn't say much, but as usual, she mentioned Brandon. She told me how thoughtful he was, how he had bought health supplements for my aunt and toys for my little nephew. For years ago, when my cousin got engaged, Brandon went with me. Before we went, I had told him that my parents had passed, and I grew up with my aunt. Normally, he was careless, but that day he was especially considerate, noticing so many things I hadn't even thought of. In the end, he gave a very expensive gift. I quietly listened. Finally, I asked, "When was that?" She replied, "A couple of days ago." But he seemed a bit off that day. He was acting strange. I asked him why you weren't with him, and he wouldn't answer. I took a deep breath. What was that supposed to mean? If he had decided to distance himself from me, why was he doing all these things secretly? Did he realize that the more he acted like this, the harder it would be for me to ever forget him? This couldn't be what he wanted. I said, if he comes again, don't let him in. I'm not in contact with him anymore. I confessed to him, and he rejected me. My cousin was taken aback, then tried to comfort me for a long time. Soon after, she and my aunt discussed setting me up with a few potential matches. It was too much for me. But it had almost become an obsession for my aunt. She had always thought Brandon and I would end up together, so she wasn't in a hurry. Now that she knew it wasn't happening, she developed a mouthful of canker sores within just a few days. I had no choice but to meet two of the matchmakers. The day I ran into Brandon, I had just finished meeting the second one. As I walked out of the private room, I happened to bump into Brandon and his friends. He was wearing a white shirt and black pants, his face expressionless. After more than a month apart, his demeanor had become much colder. When he saw me, he instinctively stepped forward. Then, as if remembering something, he stopped in his tracks and looked away. It was as though he hadn't seen me. But his friends had already noticed me. They seemed unaware of the situation between Brandon and me. They invited me to join them for dinner. Lewis glanced at Brandon and tried to dissuade them. It's fine, Aurora just came out of the private room, she's probably already eaten. You guys don't need to insist. Just as he finished, someone's phone rang. They picked up, said a couple of words, and hung up. Then they told Brandon, Kathy's asking where we are, she said she's coming. Their tone was completely natural, as if this happened all the time. But I remembered, in the past, no one would ever have helped deliver messages for another girl. As I was thinking this, I heard Brandon's voice. Give it to her. Then, as if remembering something, he finally looked at me and said, his voice tight, stay, join us for a meal. I paused for a moment, then nodded. Okay. I was the last to enter. Only 2 seats were left in the private room. One next to Brandon. The other, far from him. I knew that seat was saved for me. For all these years, there was always one seat left for me by Brandon's side. Everyone was used to it. I looked at Brandon, and he was looking at me, his gaze calm, without a hint of emotion. As though it didn't matter. But when I sat down, I noticed his hand, resting by his side, trembled slightly. Someone asked, why aren't you sitting next to Brandon? I thought for a moment and gave a casual excuse. I hadn't been mindful before. Now, he had already rejected me. I needed to understand my place. That wasn't the seat for me. Before long, Kathy walked in and sat next to Brandon. I watched without making a sound. I had eaten quite a bit earlier, so I wasn't hungry. Brandon didn't seem to have much of an appetite either. He must not have eaten before coming. So it was my presence that made him lose his appetite. Sitting beside Brandon, Kathy was uncharacteristically sweet. The two of them exchanged a few words from time to time. I watched for a moment before silently averting my gaze. At the end, Kathy shot me a provocative glance. Then, as she brushed past me, she suddenly whispered in my ear, I heard you've been living under someone else's roof since you were little. No wonder you're so unlikable, always clinging to Brandon like that. My body stiffened instantly, and I locked eyes with her. This was something I'd only ever told Brandon. Before Kathy could say more, I shoved her away. At that moment, I was surprisingly calm. Still want to fight? Bring it on. But Kathy suddenly fell silent, stepping back 2 paces. Last time, she'd been thoroughly defeated under my hand. I looked toward Brandon. Brandon. Come over. We need to talk. The truth is, this whole thing hadn't stirred me at all anymore. It didn't hurt me. But just then, in that split second, something clicked. He froze, turning around, still unaware of what had just happened. Kathy tried to follow. I glared at her. I'm talking to him. You'd better stay out of this. Brandon didn't make any move to defend her. Lewis understood, stepping forward to pull Kathy toward his car. Once everyone had left, I turned back to Brandon. We locked eyes for a moment. He pursed his lips and spoke first. What do you want to say? I stared directly into his eyes. You like Kathy, don't you? That's why you've been putting up with her being around you. Brandon furrowed his brow, then sneered. Does it matter? At least she didn't pretend to be my friend, lying to me for 6 years. His words were sharp. It felt like he was just venting. I suddenly felt so tired. His actions were all saying, "Look, Aurora, you were wrong. You made a huge mistake. You ruined the person I used to be in his heart." I said, "So what? Haven't I already distanced myself from you? What more do you want me to do?" He fell silent for a moment, then, with a hint of frustration, pressed his lips together. "You liking me, it's wrong. We were fine before, weren't we?" "Yeah, I want things to go back to how they were," I said, pausing for a moment before adding, "This shouldn't be hard for you, right?" I suddenly felt drained. Loving someone might just be a fleeting moment. But letting go of someone? That's not something so simple. For the past while I'd been trying to control myself, not reaching out to him, trying to keep my heart as calm as still water. I thought, time is long, nothing is impossible. But now, standing here, he was telling me with a forceful stance. He wanted to cut things off cleanly. He wasn't adjusting well to a life without me around. But he couldn't give me the love I wanted. So, his request was simple. Forget about him. Only then could he continue to be my friend with a clear conscience. Was that fair to me? I stared at him, and all the unwillingness I had completely vanished. "Fine, listen to me. Whatever your feelings for Kathy are, whether you're truly interested in her, or whether she just happens to show up at this point and you want to use her to make me give up, that's your business. I won't ask another question. As you wished, I won't like you anymore. The same reason as before, you've treated me well, you've considered me a friend. So, I'll agree to go back to the way things were. We'll be true friends, with clear boundaries." A cool breeze swept by, rustling my skirt. His brows relaxed, as if he'd finally solved some major problem, and his whole demeanor lightened. He gave a small smile, as though amused. But for some reason, there was a hint of confusion in his eyes. Some things, he hadn't grasped at the time. And no matter how many times he thought back on it later, he could never get that moment back. From that day on, Kathy never appeared in front of me again. A strange balance settled between Brandon and me. He didn't make any moves to contact me. But his friends took turns inviting me out. Meals, hiking, skiing. All kinds of excuses. I turned them all down. The reason? I was busy. Which was true, I was away on a business trip, not even in B-City. By the time I got back, it was already 4 p.m. I was so exhausted I took a quick shower and went to bed. When I woke up, I got a call from my cousin. She had arranged a date for me. Same old place. The other person was on their way. I didn't have time to refuse, so I quickly tidied up and headed out. When I arrived, I realized my cousin had really put some thought into this one. He was pretty handsome, with a bit of a Brandon vibe. We chatted for a bit, but then he had to step out to take a call. I sat there, lost in thought, when I suddenly remembered something and quickly checked my phone. It was Brandon's birthday today. I'd completely forgotten. There had been so much going on lately, and I hadn't prepared a gift for him. I opened WeChat. In the past half hour, he'd sent me a few messages. It had been over 2 months since he last messaged me. Question mark. Did you forget something? Haven't we made up? Why aren't you answering my calls? I paused for a moment, about to return his call. But just then, Brandon's call came through. His tone was a bit heavy, though it seemed like he was pretending not to care, as he asked, "What have you been busy with lately?" He meant, why was I always too busy to meet up whenever someone tried to arrange something for me? Even today, such an important day, I wasn't answering his calls. After a pause, he spoke again. "It's been a while since we saw each other." For some reason, his voice sounded a little hurt. I was about to answer when the person I was meeting walked in, their voice cold and distant. "Sorry, there was a bit of a thing." Under the lights, as I looked at his face, I couldn't help but feel that this guy's features were a little similar to someone else's. In the past, anything related to Brandon would have made me lose my focus. But now, the slight resemblance just made me shake my head nonchalantly. "It's fine." I instinctively texted Brandon, "I'm on a blind date." Then, after a pause, I was about to ask where he was celebrating his birthday. But suddenly, his breathing on the other end of the line grew heavy. Before I could speak, there was a burst of static followed by the sound of something crashing into a wall. I held the phone in my hand, stunned. The person on the other side asked, "What's going on?" "If you have something urgent, you can leave," I said, curling my fingers. I still hadn't figured out what was happening. Had I said something wrong? Brandon rarely got angry. Why had he thrown his phone? Or had I misunderstood? Maybe the phone just slipped out of his hand. I nodded and said sorry, then left the restaurant. Not long after, I got a call from work. There was an emergency. I had to go right away. I stood at the fork in the road, about to send Brandon a message to explain. I typed 2 words, but then deleted them. I told myself, forget it, what's there to explain? If I explained too much, he'd think I still had feelings for him. In the end, I called Lewis. "I won't be going. Can you wish Brandon a happy birthday for me?" Lewis hesitated for a moment, like he wanted to say something. But in the end, he just nodded. Got it. In a daze, I thought I heard a familiar voice on the other side. Cold, with a hint of self-mockery, "Don't bother her anymore." If this had happened before, knowing I'd nearly missed Brandon's birthday, I would have rushed over without a second thought. But maybe Brandon didn't need me to be like that. What he needed was just a friend. It wasn't until much later that I found out. That day, Brandon had been looking forward to it since early morning. Everyone thought that for his birthday, I would never miss it. He personally checked everything for the party again and again, arranged my favorite roses, and even used the perfume I loved most. He had so much he wanted to say to me. After all, we hadn't had a proper conversation in a long time. He waited from morning until evening, and by the time the dinner was supposed to start, most of the time had passed, but his phone still didn't ring. Someone, seeing how lost he looked, joked. "Brandon, do you like Aurora? We've all noticed that you're not exactly indifferent to her." Brandon, almost absent-minded, repeated what was said. "Me? Not indifferent to her? I like her?" The person nodded. "Yeah, it's pretty obvious." Brandon sat there for a long while, before finally opening the chat window he checked every day. After some hesitation, he started typing. He wanted to say something. At that moment, he must have wanted to say something. But the words he typed were disappointingly ordinary. Then came the phone call, catching him completely off guard. It was the first time he'd ever been so frustrated. But he didn't even know who he was angry with. In the next moment, he smashed his phone. It seemed he forgot. He rejected me, and I would always end up with someone else. No one would just stay in one place waiting for someone. The next day, I contacted Brandon first. He picked up quickly, but didn't speak right away. I didn't bring up the previous day, I just said, "I've already sent you the gift. It should be arriving soon." He paused for a moment, his voice unexpectedly hoarse. "I finally got through to you. Don't you want to say happy birthday to me in person?" I said, "Happy birthday." He laughed a little, but didn't hang up, as if making small talk. He asked, "Did you make it yourself?" I was stunned. I didn't expect him to ask that. "Does it matter whether I made it?" "No," I said. Looking back now, those gifts I gave in the past were actually a little too intimate for friends. This time, what I gave was very proper. He fell silent again. After a long while, I heard the sound of a lighter from his side. He took a drag from his cigarette, his voice muffled, almost nervous. "How did the blind date go last night?" I remembered that face. I couldn't help feeling a little guilty. "It went pretty well." I wasn't sure if he heard clearly, but he choked on the smoke. Suddenly, he coughed. I glanced at the time. "I have something to do in a bit, so I'll cut this short." He responded hoarsely, "Okay." After that day, we still kept in touch like usual. But most of the time, it was him reaching out first. That day, he sent me a message. "I'm making cookies. I forgot a few steps, can you come over and teach me?" I don't know when it started. Our conversations became about, "Can you, would you, is it okay?" It felt so unfamiliar, almost disorienting. My thoughts were interrupted, and I forgot to reply to the message. When I got home, I finally remembered when I saw him standing at the door. He glanced at his phone and then looked up at me, his expression a bit weary. "You should have finished work an hour ago. Why are you only getting back now?" I froze for a moment. I had spontaneously made plans to eat with a friend. I didn't expect Brandon to be waiting here. I was about to answer when he raised an eyebrow and asked, "Did you go meet your blind date?" I opened my mouth and then simply nodded. "Yeah." He didn't laugh, just stared at me. After a while, he spoke, calling my name with a serious tone, "Aurora." I looked at him in confusion, but just then, a phone call came in. I had to answer it. It was the blind date from that day. He asked if I was free to go see a movie together. I didn't expect there to be a second chance after I had left early last time. Before I could say anything, Brandon had already walked up behind me and asked, "Your blind date?" I sighed internally. How insecure was he to care about my dating progress? I thought for a moment and then answered the person on the phone. "Sure." I said a couple more things, set up a meeting for next week, and hung up. Brandon's gaze darkened. After a while, he smiled faintly, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "All right. You're hard to reach these days." I said, "I've been pretty busy." He scoffed lightly and didn't say anything more. He followed me inside. He rarely came over to my place. The space here was small, and he was tall. Standing in the room, he seemed somewhat awkward. I had never seen him like this. It almost made me want to laugh. He looked at me, his interest clearly piqued, and he suddenly became more at ease. He wasn't as quiet as before. He tied on an apron and quickly began working with the butter. I watched from the side. There was nothing for me to do, and I felt a bit awkward, so I started talking about things that had happened recently. Every word of mine was met with a response. I looked at him and suddenly fell silent. Something felt off. "These cookies, they're the ones you taught me to make. How could you forget the steps?" Besides, he hadn't even asked me what the next step should be. The room fell silent in an instant. I heard something almost fall over. His voice was hoarse, I just remembered. Slowly, Brandon and I finally returned to our usual way of interacting. But I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination. He didn't seem happy. A couple of days later, one of his friends had a baby's full-month celebration, and I went with him. Afterward, a few of us gathered for a meal. I hadn't planned on going. But Brandon grabbed my wrist and said, "If you're not with me and I get drunk, I won't be able to get back." The night was dark. His tone was pitiful. He looked at me, his eyes full of unspoken words. I thought for a moment and agreed. After all, this would be the last time. He had been so kind to me in the past, so it wasn't a big deal to take care of him a little. Just helping a friend. Half a month ago, I had been notified that I would be transferred to a city for work. At least 6 months. I was leaving tomorrow. After a few drinks, the atmosphere got lively, and someone suggested playing Truth or Dare. Soon, it was Brandon's turn. Someone asked, "Brandon, is there someone you like?" Brandon was silent for a moment. Then, after a long pause, he looked up and answered, "Yes." Everyone started making noise, glancing at me. Aside from me, they probably couldn't think of anyone else. I was a little taken aback. Just as I was about to speak, saying, "Don't look at me, it's not me." I had just confessed to Brandon, and he rejected me without any courtesy. No compassion. But before I could say anything, Brandon smiled, looked at me, and said, "All right, let's continue." I was lucky, I hadn't lost until the very end. Right before it finished, I finally lost once. The person to ask the question was Brandon. He held his cards, and everyone around was looking at us with knowing glances. He asked me, "What will you choose?" I thought for a moment. "Dare." His eyebrows lifted slightly, his lips pressing together as if he was a little nervous. "Message your blind date. Tell him you can't go to the movie tomorrow because you have something else." Our gazes met. I didn't move. Brandon raised his eyes, his expression more commanding, and slowly spoke, "Is it hard?" I said, "Yes, it's hard." Actually, that night, I did tell the guy the truth. I declined the movie invitation. But I didn't need to tell Brandon about it. We were just friends, there was no need to talk about these things. Saying too much might cross a line. I picked up my drink and downed it in one go. Continue. In the second half of the game, Brandon kept drinking, his face dark and frightening. It was pretty late by the time we were done. Brandon had really drunk too much. I took him back home. When we reached the villa's gate, I asked him for the keys. He patted himself down, looked at me with the corners of his eyes reddened, and said, "I didn't bring them." I froze. What were we going to do now? He seemed clear-headed enough, though. "We can go to your place." My place wasn't far from here. Looking at it now, this seemed like the only viable option. I took him back to my house. He staggered beside me, constantly glancing at me. His gaze was direct. Suddenly, he asked me in a soft voice, "Aurora, I forgot to ask you before, when did you start liking me?" I didn't hesitate much. 6 years. I've liked you for 6 years. Over this time, this topic had almost become a taboo between us. Now, though, I guessed it was because he was drunk that he had finally asked. He pressed his lips together and fell silent. His whole body tensed up. Back at the house, I made him a bowl of warm sake soup. He sat on the couch, holding the bowl, took a big sip, his collar slightly askew, and looked at me. "It's good." I couldn't help but laugh. "What's so good about this stuff?" Once he finished, I squatted down, gently coaxing him, and took the bowl from his hands. Just then, the light suddenly went out. The power cut off. I was about to get up when his hand suddenly locked around my waist. I stumbled into his arms. Our breaths intertwined. The alcohol was making him a bit more forceful. His lips were almost touching mine, his breath warm. He called my name over and over, "Aurora. Aurora." I pushed him away. "All right, lie down and sleep. It's almost morning." I had an early flight. I hadn't finished packing. I didn't have time to waste here with him. After a while, the lights came back on. Brandon didn't look well. He struggled, trying to adjust his clothes. I bent down, wanting to help him change into something more comfortable. Before, whenever he was drunk, I would always take care of him like this. But that thought quickly faded. It didn't feel right. I turned to head to the bedroom. But then, he suddenly grabbed my wrist. He gripped me tightly, his breathing more labored, and was muttering something. I couldn't quite catch it. But I vaguely heard words like regret and like. Moonlight streamed in, casting its glow on him. Suddenly, I thought, oh, this is the man I've secretly liked for 6 years. When I left, Brandon was still asleep. I called Lewis. "Brandon's at my place. Can you come get him?" Lewis reflexively asked, "What about you?" I glanced at the suitcase beside me. "I'm going to City A. I won't be back for a while." He was silent for a moment. "Does he know? Did he let you go?" I was a little confused. Why wouldn't he let me leave? Lewis paused, then spoke slowly. "What I mean is, even if it's for work, you don't have to go that far. Stay here, he'll make sure things work out for you." I smiled faintly. He and I are just friends. Friends don't need to do things like that for each other. After I arrived in City A, I started adjusting, looking for a place. It was busy, but I was pretty happy. In the past, Brandon would have helped me take care of all these things. Now that I was doing it on my own, I found it wasn't so bad. Brandon messaged me twice. The first time was when I had just landed. I opened my phone to find a short message from him. He said, "Leaving without saying goodbye? Aurora, you really are heartless." I didn't know what to reply, so I thought for a while and just wrote, "Yeah." The second time was in the middle of the night. It had been 2 weeks since I got here. It was my birthday. He sent a long message. In it, he talked about how he had cooked a whole big table of dishes that day, inviting a lot of people over. Some people couldn't handle the spice and complained to him, "Why is everything so spicy?" That day, he didn't eat a single bite. At the end, he asked me, "Is the food there bland? Are you adjusting okay? Is anyone giving you a hard time?" I read it twice. Finally, I replied, "I'm used to it." No. What was he doing again? When he acted like this, I'd start thinking he might like me. A couple of days later, I came down with a high fever. I took a taxi alone to the hospital, got registered, and started in 4. I sat in the hospital lobby, watching people come and go. I thought back to 2 years ago, when I was so busy, I didn't have time to eat and barely slept, collapsing from exhaustion. It was the same kind of scene back then, someone stayed by my side the whole time. I just had to sit there, and he took care of everything for me. I stayed in the hospital for 8 days. It was he who arranged for me to have a private room, where I slept better than anyone. He stayed up with me for several nights, worrying and watching over me. But that version of him, he didn't like me. Amid the noise, I suddenly burst into tears. How did we end up here? It turned out that even when I thought I had given up, there were moments when I would still feel a lingering attachment. This is just who I am. I'm sensitive, insecure, and a coward. But now, I should truly face these feelings and let them go. I went to the hospital several days in a row after that. I didn't think about Brandon anymore. On the last day, as I was leaving the hospital, I saw someone hurrying toward me from a distance. He saw me and quickly walked up. I heard you were sick. How are you? Are you feeling better? I was stunned for a long time, then smiled for some reason. I'm fine now. By the way, Brandon, do you remember that question you asked me before? He furrowed his brows, his expression actually a bit nervous. What? Go ahead, you say first. I have something to tell you too. I said, all right, I'll go first then. I repeated the question he had asked me. Then, I said with certainty, you were right. I'm only 25 this year, I haven't met many people yet. There will always be someone who will treat me better than you. By then, I wouldn't have to hide my feelings anymore under the guise of friendship. Whispers in the night, delicate thoughts. There would always be someone who would listen. And,